Now, to talk more on this, joining us now, we have with us Dr. Kim Yong-chol, a research fellow from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So finally, it seems, after the last meeting that was scheduled between Kim Yong-chol and Mike Pompeo was abruptly cancelled at the last minute back in November, it looks like this meeting will finally be taking place, this time in Washington. I think that's quite interesting as well, the fact that Kim Yong-chol is going straight to Washington, because that's not something that usually happens with North Korean officials.
Yeah, oftentimes the North Korean officials end up having meetings in New York because that's where the North Koreans have their representative office to the United Nations. That way they can get diplomatic support and logistical support from the ground. That's why most of meetings, these kind of meetings take place in New York. But in this case, I think there's a different mission with Kim Yong-chol. Kim Yong-chol is going to the United States, not just to have a meeting with Secretary Pompeo, but actually to sit down with President Trump himself to discuss about very important terms of negotiation with North Korea. I think the reason why he's going to Washington is because he has to meet with President Trump. Kim
Yong-chol is said to be bringing a letter with him from Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, and he's hopefully, I think, with speculating that he'll be hand-delivering it to President Trump himself. And this continuing on this kind of letter diplomacy that the two leaders have enjoyed so far. It's only been half a month since Trump received this another letter from Kim Jong-un marking the beginning of the new year. Why do you think another letter is coming so soon?
Well, this is something, we're talking about politics here, the politics of perception. I think the two sides, when I'm talking about President Trump on one hand and Kim Jong-un on the other hand, they want to convey the impression that the two are discussing about this very important issue at the highest level, that they are maintaining very close dialogue with each other. So, the letter itself doesn't really matter, obviously. It's a physical presentation of it. It gives a perception to the international community that Trump and Kim Jong-un, they're on the same page when it comes to their desire to see a successful negotiation. So I think that's the reason why they are conducting this letter diplomacy.
So there's nothing you think in the letter that we need to be really concerned about?
Well, I think the letter is going to state pretty much the same content that we have. We have seen before, such as North Korea is going to, this letter to President Trump, Kim Jong-un is to reaffirm the North Korea's commitment to denuclearization, that is willing to implement important denuclearization measures in exchange for corresponding concessions from the United States. Probably that will be the content of the letter.
So we've been getting various news reports that he's been spotted at Beijing airport, presumably on his way to Washington. But the U.S. State Department has yet to confirm this meeting is happening at all. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that it reflects the past experience in which North Korea canceled, actually the United States as well, canceled planned meetings at the last minute. I think the United States government is going to confirm that the meetings are going to take place once they see Kim Yong-chol landing on the U.S. soil. So I think that's the reason why they're being cautious rather than being ambiguous.
Of course, there was previous experience when when U.S. officials were planned to meet, I believe, in Singapore last time, and North Korean officials just didn't show up for working.
Well, that's one example of that. Also, the United States has done the same. President Trump, for instance, canceled the planned visit by Secretary Pompeo to Pyongyang at the last minute, saying that North Korea wasn't really negotiating, not in a bad faith, but not seriously. So yeah, so both sides have grounds to be a little bit cautious about confirming these kind of meetings.
So maybe we should wait till Kim Yong-chol lands in Washington as well, and we get confirmation of that before we assume that this meeting is going ahead.
Yeah.
But let's for now assume it is going ahead. The next question is, what are these two going to talk about? So he's meeting with Mike Pompeo, and there's question about whether they're actually going to talk about measures towards denuclearization or reciprocal measures from the U.S., perhaps the easing of sanctions. Do you think that's the kind of thing they're going to be talking about? Or is this really strictly about setting the details for this next summit?
Well, I think setting the details for the next summit is going to be the most important item on the agenda. But I think there's also another important issue in which whether North Korea is going to express its commitment to carry out some of the very important denuclearization measures that they have promised to do to the United States, such as shutting down Punggye-ri test sites and Dongchang-ri missile test sites, as well as doing some shutting down the Yongbyon nuclear facilities. So if the United States hears this kind of commitment coming from North Korea, Kim Yong-chol in particular, then I think the U.S. will have to reciprocate such gestures. And the North Korea would like to hear directly from President Trump whether United States is going to give North Korea the so-called corresponding measures, in which in this case North Korea wants the relaxation of the sanctions that are currently in place against its economy. So I think they want to see like this personal assurance coming from the very top in this case. That's the reason why they are going to, the Kim Yong-chol is going all the way to Washington to sit down with President Trump for a meeting that's probably is going to last less than an hour. So they need this like a very personal confirmation, which actually makes a commitment political, as well as very important and gives a lot of weight to it. I think that's the gesture that North Koreans are expecting.
It's not the usual kind of diplomatic channels that most countries go through, but I guess North Korea is a special case.
Oh, it's a very abnormal situation. Right now, we're talking about two parallel meetings taking place at the same time. There's Kim Yong-chol going to Washington, presumably to sit down with President Trump, but at the same time, the pre-meeting that should have taking place in parallel, possibly in Sweden, because the Foreign Minister of North Korea, Choi is right now going to Sweden to sit down, probably with meet with the Special Representative Steve Biegun. So these are very strange developments taking place, but we're talking about 2019, and we're talking about President Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Of course, there's no obviously confirmation on that meeting either, so we'll have to see, keep a close eye on what's happening in Sweden to see whether they will actually meet. Now, so despite these developments, it was quite interesting that also that U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, now he made a little comment at the State Department yesterday. He said, while the president is promising dialogue with Chairman Kim, we still await concrete steps by North Korea to dismantle the nuclear weapons that threaten our people and our allies in the region. Now, it's quite a strong statement, perhaps pouring cold water on some of the feel-good factor about having these talks in the first place. Could we be seeing this as some type of warning before these talks take place?
Oh, definitely. I think Vice President Pence is signaling to North Korea that even if North Koreans can talk directly to President Trump, essentially having President's ear, that's not going to be enough, because there's the rest of the U.S. government waiting on the wings and to make sure that the North Korea implements its terms of the negotiations. So this is one message that Vice President Pence is sending. But on the other hand, what his statement is very interesting, because he actually connotes that there's no pre-existing agreement between North Korea and the United States when it comes to nuclearization. So it allows us to guess what kind of discussion Kim Yong-chol and then President Trump are going to have this time. I think it's going to be less about the nuclearization steps. It'll be more about when and where they're going to have the second U.S. DPRK summit.
Yesterday in South Korea, the South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa, she held a press conference with Korean press, and she said there were many measures that the U.S. could concede to North Korea, such as ending the agreement ending the Korean War agreement, or humanitarian aid packages. Do you think these kind of things could be discussed on the table here during this meeting?
I think it's too soon to discuss about these kind of issues. I think these are the concrete details that will be discussed at the staff's level. There's possibly it's going to be on the agenda of discussion between Special Representative Steve Biegun and Vice Foreign Minister Choi. But it's going to be, I don't think these details will be discussed at the meeting between Kim Yong-chol and Trump.
We will also hopefully be getting a date of some sort quite soon about this next US-North Korea summit. And in Korea, we were maybe thinking towards mid-February, but a Washington Post report says actually it's now more likely to be in March or April. Do you think there's some sort of delay tactic there?
No, I think it's more of a reflection of what's going on in Washington right now, with the effect of the impact of a shutdown affecting the scheduling of the summit. I'm sure without the shutdown, the summit could have taken place next month. But then it is said that the summit usually takes at least six weeks to arrange before it actually takes place. So the shutdown which is still ongoing, actually has delayed a lot of U.S. federal government's operations. I think the summit preparation has also been affected by that. So it's purely about logistics, not less about politics in this case, in my view. That's my view.
Yes, and President Trump, of course, recently gave a dinner where he served, McDonald's and Wendy's burgers. Hopefully, Kim Yong-chol won't be needing some sort of a dinner plans because he might be getting burgers as well there.
Well, could we like take out Chinese food? Who knows?
Yes, we'll keep an eye on that. Now, let me turn to what's happening actually in Korea, because South Korea is also putting in efforts as well. They're not just staying still. Seoul and Washington's two working groups had a meeting, or had a video conference today. And Washington, in this meeting, seemed to have approved South Korea to send a whole bunch of Tamiflu vaccinations to antiviral medication to North Korea early next week. What do you make of this announcement today?
Well, I mean, there's no sanctions per se prohibiting any other external party sending medicine to North Korea right now. But the reason why South Korea had to discuss with the U.S. About sending Tamiflu to North Korea, I think it had a lot to do with the size of the aid this time. We're talking about 200,000 doses of Tamiflu, and actually in street market terms, that would actually be valued like a couple of $1 million. So that's the reason why I think South Korea and the U.S. had to be on the same page about supplying this amount of medicine to North Korea. So I think, but on the other hand, let me emphasize this again. There's no sanctions currently in place that prohibits supply of medicine to North Korea, especially at the individual level or the NGO level.
They're also said to have touched on further other topics, such as further excavations of Korean war remains and separated family reunions. Now, this issue, though, should be between South Korea and North Korea, it seems. But how come the U.S. is involved in talking about this as well with South Korea?
The reason why the U.S. and the South Korea had to discuss about recovery of remain issues and also the meeting of the separated family members was because it actually involves some of the sanctions measures. There's right now sanctions against supplying North Korea with high-tech sensors and also military equipment, so dual-use goods, essentially civilian goods that could be used for military purposes. The reason why this is being discussed is because when you conduct remain recovery operations, especially along the DMZ, you have to actually detect, you have to work in minefields, so you need mine detectors. And the mine detectors is actually a high-tech equipment, and there's very strong export control measures against supplying this kind of equipment to North Korea. So I think U.S. and South Korea discuss about coming out of special waiver to allow South Korea to supply North Korea some sort of a sensor. And that's one reason. When it comes to the reunion of separated families, I think it's because South Korea wants to have these meetings in North Korea, maybe in Mount Gyeongang. And probably there's some implications when it comes to financial support for this kind of meetings. I mean, whether South Korea will be allowed to supply North Korea with money and then some necessary goods, or whether the family members can take money to North Korea so that they can give it to their relatives. So this could be affecting some of the financial sanctions measures in place. I think they'll discuss some of the exceptions to the rule in this case.
A lot of things to discuss.
That's right.
South Korea's nuclear envoy also today met with his Chinese counterpart who came to Seoul to visit. Now, I'm sure they'll have much to talk about, but the timing comes very recently after Kim Jong-un visited Beijing. So do you think that that's what they talked about? Do you think the Chinese nuclear envoy was briefing the South Korean nuclear envoy on that visit?
Well, clearly that's going to be part of the protocol. I mean, there's a very important meeting between the Chinese leader and the North Korean leader in Beijing, and it will be actually expected for a Chinese envoy to explain what happened, the meeting to his or her South Korean counterpart. So definitely they discuss about that and possibly about the upcoming multilateral peace treaty regime that North Korea actually came up with, and that involves China, obviously. So I think China and South Korea would like to start at least start the initial dialogue about this issue.
That's well, we'll have to close out the show for today. Thank you for coming in and sharing.
My pleasure. Yeah.